Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Jamgön Lasso, then Kazan Shushu, then Samba Shonchup to Simje Patang, Gunung Nayatang, then Tagana Shinke, Gunjo Chute, Tambe Chu, Seronang.
So, as was explained in some detail yesterday, please begin by generating the body-mind, and in that very context, as was also explained yesterday, one corrects both motivation and conduct, and with the body-mind as one's basis, one then attentively listens to the explanations of the sacred Buddha Dharma.
Tatare ma shuye te tene chatan sheja kuncham zeg nang ne ta to shine dang la thong ta tenju ko ne ma ka mi shugi yo de.
So the topic is that of shamatha and vipassana meditation as set forth in an encyclopedia that sets forth the many Buddhist topics, the name of which is the Treasury of Knowledge.
Tene tanghamai shuyi te shejan kuncham ze de zambapo Jamgön Lodrö Thaye shuken.
And last year, when the section on shamatha meditation was explained, Khenpo Rinpoche gave some explanations as to the author of this work, Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye.
Tene Jamgön Lodrö Thaye shuken te peche ta karshu Pög nang le chenbe jebu jig nang la tene chulu riksuma shepa la tösam nang gamdrup nang ne wane yongtra ke
He is, in terms of Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhism, known as an unbiased Buddhist master, in that he studied the scriptures, contemplated their profound meaning, and practiced meditation in consequence of these two practices, listening to teachings and contemplating their profound meaning. In terms of all Buddhist traditions in Tibetan Buddhism.
Ben pöjü mantin la tene pöjü pöde songwe pögü de songwe nangba sanje be tembal la kadin cheshu lam jigre shuna mandigba mer.
And one can say with certainty that he's a Buddhist master of old, who contributed to a very, very great extent to the preservation of the various Buddhist traditions in Tibet. He made great efforts throughout his life as to preserving the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni's doctrine.
Na kongge zebek chenleg chodoma sona du tatayang netuba jiware.
And his actions have still an impact today in terms of preserving the Buddha's doctrine.
Pena ta kong zebek shaje da zo cheshu de zexing ma senkendere.
He authored what is known as the 5 treasuries. Well, some of them were compilations, some of them were works that he himself authored.
Zexing de tapena bedo shibin machi tangaro jabajina.
Introduction on a Tuesday. Yes.
Can't see the
So one of the 5 great treasures is the text, well, we're studying a part of it, known as well, the Tibetan name is Chödrak. One may translate that as the treasury of knowables, or the treasury of all objects of knowledge. Now, the various sections of this work are summed up in the so-called 3 trainings. So basically you can sum up the many topics set forth in this work into these 3 categories called the 3 trainings.
Lapa Surumji Lapa, Lapa Tingens Lapa, Lapa Sherab Lapa Tenzo, Labdu. Lapa Surumji Lapa, Tenzing Sherab Sumtre.
Now, the three trainings are those of ethics, samadhi, and higher knowledge. Now, in terms of ethics, you have a number of codes of ethics in Buddhism, depending upon which Buddhist tradition you're a follower of. There is Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, the two basic Buddhist traditions. Each has a number of subdivisions. In Theravada Buddhism you find the Shravaka tradition and so on. And Mahayana Buddhism has two basic divisions. That of the path of a bodhisattva and that of the Buddhist Tantras. Now, within each of these, again, you find subdivisions. So, in his Treasury of Knowledge, or Treasury of Objects of Knowledge, however one wants to phrase it, the Tibetan word as to the title would translate as objects of knowledge. However, if one translates that as knowledge, I presume that this would be okay too, because knowledge within knowledge, or knowledge knows certain objects of knowledge. So
that is
one can presume that implication, as it were.
That is so to send the thing you're then Tagana Shinke, then the chick tere, and the chick de Damgan the Sunkitere.
Then there is yet another one of these 5 treasuries, in Tibetan known as Dammak Zö, the treasury of key instructions.
That Damgan Zö Sinkinte, gay, that Jongdong Rao Kandechiri Yorsana, Ko Dong Rao. Perla, tene Dugju Shintachimbo Yes, Sinki Yosh. Berg Nangba Sanje by the Duna, Dugju Shintachimbo Yes, Sinki Yam today.
Now, if one looks at the Buddhist history as to Tibet, today everyone speaks of 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. Now, in terms of the entire history of or Buddhist history in Tibet, those 4 schools were not the only ones. They have evolved over time, as it were, and they are what today remain of previous periods, and the many more traditions, more than 4, that existed then. And in terms of Tibet's Buddhist history, there are in specific 8 lineages. The Drubju Sungdurva, Drubtsik, the Kandishigul Reina.
Nyamsu Lung ne, Debu Top Debeki Juba Sigas.
There are 8 specific lineages, all of which, or where, the primary focus is and was to actualize a realization of the teachings in those lineages. So, depending upon whether a given practitioner was following one or many of these traditions, the primary focus would be to actualize a realization of the teachings of the lineage one was a follower of.
And
the first of these 8 traditions is that of the Nyingma school.
And it
has 2 basic divisions, the divisions of Karma and Terma.
Takama sedu lama chine chilama tapena pele ina Guru Rinpoche tang Kinchin Shiwatso Penchen Bemala Metra Zokong number sumne Ma loma chila non loma tige loma chila non par ma cheve ju ontala nima kama sungbi.
So the Karma section, its outlook is primarily the following, namely that it's about a lineage of transmission where the master gives the entire transmissions of the lineage to the disciple he deems able to actualize a realization of those transmissions. And in the Karma section of the Nyingma school, the beginnings of those lines of transmission are primarily that they start with the line of transmission in question in terms of Tibet's Buddhist history, Guru Padmasambhava, and then on to the well-known Indian Buddhist master Shantarakshita, who also lived and worked in Tibet for a period of time, and then another Indian Buddhist master, Vimalamitra. Sumka Pöla Mare Kong Nampa Sum Pöla. So all 3 of these old Indian Buddhist masters, or Indian Buddhist masters of old, I should say, lived and worked in Tibet. Hence, these transmissions, the majority of them in the Karma section of the Nyingma school, start out with these 3 masters who brought these teachings to Tibet, or lines of transmission, rather.
Nima kamen nang la jön di yongda bi yuk deba so mayin pa jön che la nyewa so
Gin che la nyewa so
halam lama res de ti song jön di yö deba re ma to temi che charwa da wo tente den Jamgön Lodrö Thaye ka kanga su ru chen Karma section no di yore chitang karma ta ja chen bore pe misiba mangbo ri damngan je gnan pa che che la nyewa tanzo shoji la du yor.
Che la nyewa? Da Chödrak du Kongtrül Lodrö Chödrak du Kongias söna.
Söna, tapena.
Digi gyumsengi ming Chela.
Nyewa se tsigiyot.
Now, at the time of Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye, and he lived the lokatser den så gibarla. Kongtrül tang den så sum gibarla.
Paje lotuja dun jejal nyewatwa.
There would have been approximately 800 years between the presence of these masters, these Indian masters in Tibet, and Jamgön Lodrö Thaye. Now, throughout that 800-year period, it had been the case that gradually those transmissions of the Karma section were about to be discontinued, in that it was exceedingly hard at the time of Lodrö Thaye to find individuals who held these transmissions. In the early days, and for a couple of hundred years I presume, there were many masters from whom the transmissions could be obtained, but at the time of Lodrö Thaye, things had changed, which very often happens over time, and many of those lines of transmission in the Karma section of the Nyingma school were about to discontinue, simply because one couldn't find anyone who held these transmissions. And it was Jamgön Lodrö Thaye who worked very hard, traveled far and wide throughout Tibet to find someone in a remote place who would be the last one who held the transmission. And he would then request the transmission and then later on he compiled all these transmissions in what we now know as Damngak Tsu, the Treasury of Key Instructions, so that these instructions wouldn't be lost. Their transmission could continue.
Tene ta nipate kadam singitere.
Ta Damngak Tsu nipa marera.
Damngan zeg nang la dubu shin ta chimbo jeg nang nipa.
Nipa kare sungin.
Dubu shin ta chimbo jeg nang tongpo de nima che.
Yeah.
Nipa te kadam ba.
Then, in terms of the 8 lineages that were prevalent at the outset of Tibet's Buddhist history, we have the Kadampa tradition.
Kadampa ke damngate kan pena bel zo bel nangkin namyong kin te joje panda atishare.
And it was the Indian Buddhist master Atisha who brought this tradition to Tibet, the instructions of this tradition, and who spread the practice of this tradition far and wide in Tibet.
Tene chitang ke kadampa damwa denzo lamrem dang denzo yupa yuk deva re te khahe che la nyewa re deva yinsa jamgön kadayang kong tapsi che ne dinang la drikyor.
Now, this tradition at the time of Jamgön Lodrö Thaye had not been subject to as an extensive risk of extinction as the Karma tradition. However, some of the lineages of transmission or lines of transmission were close to extinction, close to discontinue and to be discontinued. And here again, Jamgön Lodrö Thaye worked hard and was able to re-establish these traditions.
Tene ta dugyushin ta chimbo yeg nana sumbate lamde singetre.
And then in terms of the 8, there is number 3, named path and fruition.
Ta lamde te la jupada masona lopye tsokye tang lopye sen yewa ninda ba shenna kure. Tsokye sen mangbu nang la pena nang ye ji tang lopye se de lomangone ne den la minga to jarne song su ji de ni yue de ba.
In nangyu chipara wa.
Zawe yongte yepadori yongro yin yang ta songsu da to minda wa yue de.
So path and fruition concerns the Hevajra Tantra, and in this tradition, the 3rd of the 8, or this lineage or line of transmission, the 3rd of the 8, known as path and fruition, there are 2 ways of communicating or giving these transmissions of the Hevajra Tantra. One, where teachings in general on this specific Tantra, and then specific instructions and so on and so forth, are given to a group of people. And then there is the second of the 2 approaches here, where a master of this tradition gives the same transmission, but adds so-called key instructions, and here that approach would concern just one or one to 7 people, never more, selected by the master in question, and the master in question would know these individuals well enough to have been able to make the judgment that these individuals are proper vessels for those teachings, are practitioners who would be able to actualize a realization of those teachings. And for the sake of benefiting this type of practitioner, the added key instructions are given by the master, which isn't done in the group situation. And it's primarily the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism, or the Tibetan Buddhist tradition today, known as the Sakya school, that holds this line of, or these lines of transmission. However, however, as to the various key instructions associated with the Hevajra Tantra, at the time of Lodrö Thaye, there were transmissions in that regard that were about to be discontinued, and again Lodrö Thaye worked very hard, was in effect able to re-establish these lines of transmission.
Tene yevatela dugu yevatela marba kaju singeta kaju baront.
And then we have the fourth of the eighth, Marpa Kaju.
Ta kaju bala marban jube yonra so yon juk de yorete yena yang ta che ye chung jege damga mongbuchi ta che la nyeware de kap tedu.
Kaju yongdra de chi she
Jixie ra
chung ye ra.
re
Tene den su kanga che la nyevare vede du.
tedu me yonra damga den so yu de yore che. Te yin yang tene mongbuchi che la nyeware de yore. Penna
Che la nyeva de yongdra meken.
Nyongdra menkin ta che ji chung je gna ne penna marsang se da tene tofu se da disu damga den so hanam che o yor
Martsang.
marsang ka ju tofu ka ju yerba ka ju
Yige trilong gången då tenne tropu kaju
yerba
yerpa
shuksip
shuksep.
o teje te
Now here in terms of Marpa Kaju, that line of transmission, you have the following subdivisions: one category of 4 and one category of 8. The 4 are those lines of transmission that arose in connection with the founding fathers of the Marpa Kaju, meaning disciples of the founding fathers of the Marpa Kaju tradition. Usually this is translated as the 4 great and the 8 lesser. However, great refers back to the great initial masters, and lesser does not mean lesser in terms of value or stature or prominence. It is simply that that group of lines of transmissions were founded by disciples of the great masters that were there at the outset of the Marpa Kaju line of transmission. So one could simply say the 4 early traditions and the 8 later traditions. So it's not a matter of great and lesser as big and small type of thing, not at all. Now, in general, at the time of Jamgön Lodrö Thaye, the well-known or generally known instructions and so on of those lineages were available. However, in terms of Martsangla sopa gegenangla lor, in terms of the group of 8 later traditions founded by disciples of the initial great masters, there had been decline in some of them, such as the Martsang Kagyu tradition, the Tropu Kagyu tradition, the Yerpa Kagyu tradition, and the Shukseb Kagyu tradition. So Jamgön Kongtrül again worked hard, finding the few individuals who held the transmissions that were about to become extinct, traveled to wherever they lived, requested and received the transmissions, and then re-established them.
Daga nashinge kaju che yesinge ti nane ta panna kansang te kana kansam jamgön pheb ka kansang gi choju te kana kansam ji yede ba.
Now in the four Kagyu schools of the Marpa Kagyu line of transmission, the four lineages arising with the initial great masters. One example would be the Kamtsang Kagyu, which is synonymous with the Karma Kagyu, and most of its transmissions were intact. However, there were a few that were running the risk of becoming extinct. And then there is the Baram Kagyu lineage, where again there were some transmissions that where one saw a risk for extinction. Then there was the Tsalpa Kagyu, where the majority of transmissions were about to become extinct. And again, Jamgön Lodrö Thaye worked hard, found the few who held the transmissions, requested and received them, and restored or re-established these traditions. Drukpa, Rigung, now, in terms of the category of the 8 later lineages of transmissions, the Drukpa Kagyu, the Drigung Kagyu, and the Talung Kagyu, the majority of their transmissions were intact. However, again, there were a few that where Jamgön Lodrö Thaye saw a risk for their extinction, and he restored them. Then, in terms of the 8 initial ones we were talking about, number 5 is Shangpa Kagyu.
Shangpa Kagyu singente Berger Chembo Chongbo Nanjurki,
founded by a great Tibetan translator of old, not just a translator but also a master, Khenpo Rinpoche. He traveled to India 7 times from Tibet. And attained in that lifetime, the 10th of the 10 bhumis. And his main gurus were 2 wisdom dakinis. In addition to these 2 root gurus of his, he relied upon 108 Indian Buddhist masters of old. And he lived a very long life. He's known to have lived for approximately 150 years.
Ota tine ma ju yongbe dangma tala shongba ka ju segiyot.
And the line of transmission in terms of Tibet's Buddhist history associated with him is known as the Shangpa Kaji.
Ta di lenyo chete yang che la nyewa re deyo re Lodrö Thaye ge di dangma kanga tse tene korange tene ota di drupa chun se drupkang tsuk nigu ki drupkang to tenzo tsuk che ne tene tenpa tene towa shunga re.
Now, this tradition was about to become extinct at the time of Jamgön Lodrö Thaye. He sought out the few individuals that were left that held its transmissions and again re-established this tradition. He also established a retreat center for meditation as to this tradition, the Shangpa Kagyu, where the teachings and meditations were primarily based on the instructions of one of the two wisdom dakinis who were the root gurus of Khenpo Rinpoche. Her name is Niguma.
Ta karishu kore. Shongbeke damga tenzo kanga gyude chimbo nga la kongtu ne pelyo.
Gyude chimbo nga?
Nga la kongtu yo.
Shangpa Kagyu gi
damga te.
Damga yotse. Now, all key instructions of the Shangpa Kagyu, key instructions that perhaps it's clear now, would be given to very gifted disciples by the lineage holder. All of its key instructions, the key instructions of the Shangpa Kagyu, concern the 5 great Buddhist tantras.
Ta chupate tamsho dungal shije sanketere, shije tangcho sanketere.
Then we have number 6 in this list of 8, which is the tradition known as the tradition which focuses on pacifying suffering in all its shapes and forms by way of the sacred Dharma.
Oda di chöde pe la jagar ge trupchin dambas sangye singedege zo pelnang.
And it was the Indian Buddhist master Padampa Sangye who brought this tradition to Tibet. He traveled to Tibet from India 5 times. And this is a tradition that's very much made up of key instructions, as it were, so-called key instructions. Key instructions that Padampa Sangye himself had been given by 35 accomplished Indian Buddhist masters of his time.
Dhamma teke khung tuksa ravate sharab ki pharu tu simbatang Ali kali chulung chimbu yu singe tela khung tukare.
Ali kali tene kangi chimbu?
Ali kali
yes.
chulung chimbu yu.
Chulung?
Chuo chimbu yu singe yu de tela. Dati na shibu chiye yuro.
Da kanga de Ali kali la tog det gjorde vi.
Alkal dingo yosar ti ju tinga tamayo.
Lasso.
Dan dor na
Ali kali tene.
chulung chimbu ju songdo a ju de.
Chulung chempo ju. Now
Sanje ge de song isarwa. Yang dang sarje ning ge ne chö tamje ndogre san ju de song isarwa. Tangan zu xie ye se kan ga terawa.
Now, the various key instructions in this tradition primarily are concerned with the prajna paramita, higher knowledge gone to the other shore, and a specific Buddhist tantra which the name of which would approximately in English amount to as the great river of Ali Kali. Now Ali and Kali, these two words are Sanskrit words that refer back to the very basic components of language, any language, namely vowels and consonants. And vowels and consonants in terms of the Buddhist tantras are given quite a bit of attention in that in the Buddhist tradition one finds a number of very profound perspectives of these two very basic components of any language, of sound at all. And so this is the second main source. That Tantra is the second main source of the key instructions of the sixth school in this list of 8. The first one being that of the Prajnaparamita scriptures, higher knowledge gone to the other shore.
That Dumbatella Chödrak sungare.
Dumpa, Jorva.
Jorva yinla tuks.
Then we have number 7, which is about 6 branches in the context of so-called application.
That he Jorva yinla tuk damga te kung tusa jamden de tuch kolola tukyor.
And the source is that of the Kalachakra Tantra.
Perda ta yongtra ge lozawa chembo sam sanjeta singite ta.
Sangetra,
Sanjeta.
Kongi, Kongla Tene.
Zo de kung juryor chidan lozawa mangbochi juryor.
Dunkode,
Dunkorte.
Now, in terms of the various Sangetra
Re.
translations, Tibetan translations of the Kalachakra Tantra, the most well-known is the Tibetan translator Sangye Tra, and apparently this tradition, in terms of the 7th lineage here in the list of 8, bases itself on that translation from Sanskrit to Tibetan.
Ta Sanjeta shugente ha lebe keva chambu yisare.
Apparently, this translator was an extraordinary, learned and accomplished master.
Bebe michigna ne jagar doje den da nalanda Khenpo nanki kungmato shungyo.
Now, in terms of Tibetan Buddhist accomplished masters at the time of them traveling to India, studying, contemplating and meditating there, Sangye Tra is the only one who rose to the prominence of the office of a Pandita, a Khenpo, at the Nalanda University and
Bodh Gaya.
Another institution in the vicinity of Bodh Gaya, apparently.
Penna Janagnum Benanga Tongzing Ge Nalanda Khenpo Che Seligi Yamichi Khenpo Che is no Najashira or Jamle.
Chinese Buddhists take great pride in that one of them, who also traveled to India, a lot of Chinese practitioners did, just as the Tibetans, traveled to India and so on, and rose to prominence and attained various levels of realization and so forth. There is again only one Chinese practitioner who rose to the prominence of holding the office of a Pandita at the Nalanda University. Tongsen is his name, and Chinese Buddhist practitioners take very great pride in this.
Dene that Jebate Dere Dorje Sumgin Rubusingit.
Dorje Sumgin Yendru.
Yeah.
Then you have the eighth of the eight, the three Vajras, to be relied upon.
That is Perle Belnankinte, Perg Trutop, Kedip Jumbo Ojinpa Singite.
And here a great scholar and accomplished master, a Tibetan great scholar and accomplished master, was the founder, Kedrup Ujempa.
Kung Tene Perne Chene Ujinginela Pevade.
He traveled from Tibet to the land of Udayana.
Tene Ujinginela Penne Netinito. And
there he met with Vajrayogini face to face.
That they took up the and
he became the root guru, he was the root guru of the third Karmapa, Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö. Though he himself was of the Drupa Kagyu tradition.
That the tradition that Chimbajag, Dama Chela Nyawa Kanka, so Kasame, Daman's Sinkate Dignant.
Now, Jamgön Lodrö Thaye, in terms of these 8 lineages of transmission, prevented their extinction or their being an extinction in part in some of these lineages, and compiled the collection of scriptures known as the Treasury of Key Instructions. So that all those instructions are still available today.
Then
we have the third in this list of 5, which is the Kagyu Ngatsu, the treasury of the Kagyu tradition. Kagyu Nga, Dadi Gyuyimpa Kokura, the treasury of Kagyu Tantras.
Tati Pana Marban in your Jube Judechimbo Chusumge Wang Tang Nyamling Tigerambakanga Shochi to Digyavachre. And
here Jamgön Lodrö Thaye compiled 13 Buddhist tantras of the Marpa Kagyu school. He collected them all together in terms of their empowerments, the various stages of practice of these tantras, and so on and so forth.
And
some of these transmissions, again, at the time of Lodrö Thaye, were about to become extinct. For example, now, in terms of the Buddhist tantras, all of them have protectors. Individuals such as Dysel Lamo, that is Sanskrit I can't recall her Sanskrit name, and she in specific is associated with this Denso Chusumkagi. She is in specific associated as a protector of these 13 tantras. And apparently, Dakashe and at the time of Lodrö Thaye, some of these transmissions were about to become extinct.
The marba narupage judechimba chusumge wanka trika kanga nangne then marbe tan deso kanga la songma nudinji yondo kabure ngal cheki songma chi sura nungro nang shuyore
Sura shuyore
marbe narupa.
Now we have to go back to Marpa in India at the feet of his main guru, Naropa, the Indian Buddhist master Naropa. At the time of having received these transmissions in terms of these 13, in terms of empowerment procedures, in terms of explanatory procedures, and so on and so forth. Marpa had turned to his master, asking him, for sure, isn't it that there would be a protector or protectoress of these lineages of transmission?
Then Narobe Karasumara Nalepete Yoponan Shin Goja Choigijege, Soma Sumius.
Naropa had answered, well, there are 3 protectors, meaning individuals who protect and preserve transmissions of various kinds. There are 3 such protectors associated with me, closely associated with me, who would obey anything I ordered them to do in terms of their work and their pledges to maintain those traditions. Now, I won't give over all 3 to you, but one of them I will instruct to work for preserving the lines of transmissions that you have and that you will bring to Tibet.
Then this is the Marba so what said it up mono amne tangar Lamukali the Nonrochi shoote. Can't they say what I am?
Anyway, the story here in the scriptures doesn't give a lot of details. It simply says that Marpa prayed one-pointedly, in effect of which Naropa had decided to instruct the protectoress Dysel Thamo to support the work of Marpa, as it were, in Tibet in terms of spreading the transmissions there the 13 transmissions there that he had received in India.
Tene Narope song to Marwal. Chogune Tamsi Dempeloma. Tene Maram Tinkin Res. Did something I say. Berg Chujun Zambaso the Tanda Sonum Shukchamboy Jenki. You got some woman to Solhamre, did you dumb shitty somewhat? They 2 years.
Now, apparently, Marpa himself, in terms of the 3 protectors closely associated with Naropa, had at the time chosen these protectors. And when he voiced his choice, Naropa had said to Marpa, "You are truly a disciple capable of upholding your commitments, Samaya, tene pu, which indicates that you, a Tibetan holder of Buddhist lineages of transmission, as well as other Tibetan Buddhist masters, at this time are individuals of great merit. And you will be able to spread the teachings and transmissions of the Buddhist Tantras far and wide in your country."
That is on the Naropa the Shane song Javate, Tantan Discernment Soka Diduchi Orwa.
Now, there is a very short supplication to this protectoress in the Cardio school. It is usually recited on a daily basis. And that tradition of doing this short recital on a daily basis originates with the situation just explained to you.
Chaza, tu sol meg wanka tang sokan tang tang kanga kayu kinande Jamgön Lodrö Thaye pedu yore yin shodem di longjunte michila mato mebre.
Now, at the time of Lodrö Thaye, in the context of this specific protectoress, there are other short texts of application to her, not application, supplication to her. But this very short one, that at least in the Karma Cardio school is recited on a daily basis, there was only one person who had the text of this short supplication to these protectors at the time of Lodrö Thaye.
Ti long shue tanda Lodrö Thaye nima mangbol kongba tsuni pechen tama lobran ti shuyor.
Now, if you remember, Lodrö Thaye traveled far and wide in Tibet to find perhaps just one person who still held the transmission, and here he would have been seeking out the reading transmission. And he found out that there was such an individual living in the south of Tibet, in the Chödrak region, and he traveled on foot for many, many days in order to get there and request and receive the transmission in question. And so in terms of these treasuries that are compilations of Buddhist tantras and traditions, key instructions and so on, Lodrö Thaye traveled far and wide in Tibet at the time, very often on foot, to very remote places where he had heard there was one person who still had the transmission of what he was seeking.
And
then we have the fourth treasury, which is the Rinchen Tertsu, the treasury of precious termas being often scripture form, sometimes sacred objects that had been hidden away primarily by Guru Rinpoche and later on revealed by a treasure revealer. Tene?
Tati nanda ta yungtra ge phela tertun ashu te tertun sangye lama singit chongyo
Tertun Kangangi.
Ngashu.
The earliest treasure revealer or tertun in Tibet was
Sangye Lama.
A man by the name Sangye Lama.
Ta khung tu ne songte tertun sok terkha de pemong botun yor ya chökat tön yor tamje tön yor kundrat ko song thu ge ten tön yor.
So starting with him, then for many generations, there were many treasure revealers, tertuns, who revealed scriptures that had been hidden away, who revealed amounts or stacks of sacred substances that had been revealed, that had been hidden away, who revealed various sacred objects of art and so on.
Then tertun jacha mo shen debe nang ne tertun semi zebatsan meki tertun yungcha tam chökat de lan tam sik sel meki so shoji lan jamgön dik nang ba che
So
tertun tine song de tertun jacha mo shen yo re de di nan zo ge
now, in terms of tertuns, treasure revealers, there have been hundreds of them throughout Tibet's Buddhist history. All are not viewed as authentic. Some are associated with undesirable qualities, such as not having properly upheld samaya and so on. Therefore, the authenticity of some is disputed. Now, in terms of Rinchen Tertsu, here Jamgön Lodrö Thaye choose to include the tertuns and what they had revealed, whether scripture, sacred objects or anything else. Treasure revealers who were undisputedly authentic. Apparently, this treasury is made up of approximately 70 works in terms of scripture. Now, in terms of these treasure revealers, if one were to add the works up of all of them, one would have a collection of thousands of volumes. There is a Dharma encampment today of this tradition called the Yarchen encampment, where or which houses approximately 1,500 scriptures revealed by various tertons or treasure revealers.
Nicolas Son yin Khenpo Rinpoche se Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye ta tene karshu nga watela jashin ka inje sere
ta delist na sangwei tsui tridu da chi in sarego
song tende song de kashe nan te song do
Khenpo kanso
간주 세긴도 간주
May tanda.
야친 까인저 세긴도
Then we have the fifth treasury, Gyakchen Kaidzu.
다 디나나 장군 코랑게 랑 짬 잡으면 뭐요? 대강가 쇼지를 드.
And it contains, among other things, many of the works authored by Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye himself.
저 최슈엔라고 때 딱가지발 차샤나 농다 유슴 때는 롱종도지 용종이 된저 관계를 알아봐도 디나는 거예요.
테네 난다 유숨 테네
가 롱종도지 좀 잠낭비 용종이 긴잘봐. 남시 시제바
오 남시 예시제바
다 김보 템바니나 용종이 세계로
닝보 템바 남시 예시제바. Now here you also find scriptures authored by other Buddhist masters, such as one of the Karmapas, Jamgön Lodrö Thaye, Karmapa. There is the inner and the profound. There is the commentary he authored to the Hevajra Tantra, as well as the Uttara Tantra Shastra. Also one finds distinguishing between primordial wisdom and the worldly mindset, and explaining the Tathagata heart, as well as other works.
다 딘제게 저칭아테 Jamgön Kongtrül Thaye 틴라긴 죽도 마선에 최슈에들이 뒤 다다냥 틴라든 내대.
So these 5 treasuries that came about due to the efforts of Jamgön Lodrö Thaye are the most well known of all his efforts that he made for the sake of preserving and restoring the Buddha's doctrine in Tibet. And the effects of these efforts are still happening today.
Then Kansia na she choya then Jamgön Lodrö Thaye Yang Khasab Doji in Garden Redas. Did sort of is
Kakyaptore.
Yang Khasab Doje, Yang Rik Doje, Pemong Cho Jabo, Pandin Chinses, and did you garden res?
Lodrö Thaye Dampo.
Tango.
Then
Khasab Doje,
Kachap Doje, Rikpe Doje, Pema
Wang Cho.
Oh. Pema Wang Cho.
Pandin Chinses.
Now, Khenpo Rinpoche himself, who acted as the head Khenpo of the Nalanda Institute for Higher Buddhist Studies for many years, during this period, Khenpo Rinpoche explains, he very often told his students, some of who were reincarnates, some of who were studying to become Khenpos, and then they themselves making efforts in terms of continuing to spread the Buddha Dharma. He often reminded them, he says, of the fact that things are very easy for us today, primarily because of the efforts of Jamgön Lodrö Thaye, who authored prolifically and who compiled these treasuries that are available today to all of us. There are also, he explained to his students, to be considered recent masters of our lineage, such as the 15th Karmapa Kakyap Dorje, the 16th Karmapa Rikpe Dorje, Pema Wongtang, Pema Wongcho, and Palden Chense Öser. Because of the collected efforts of these masters, we can today easily obtain the scriptures we need for the purpose of study, practice, contemplation, and thus develop in terms of the Buddhist path.
Penna Jetsun Marval Lozake, Yagala Linsun to Pebne, Kale Pagdumepaji Damn Namwe, Juji Jarvo Jepador Jeravi Chashana, Tapani Pandavi Chashan, two Tatayan Shebe Jun higher than Jamgön Kongtrül.
Now, if we go back to Marpa the translator and his efforts, if we consider one of the tantras he brought to Tibet, also referred to as the king of tantras, the Hivadra Tantra, and in terms of any tantra you have different perspectives. You have the empowerment perspective, you have the explanatory perspective, and so on and so forth. The reason that these and other tantras are available to Buddhist practitioners today, that the transmissions are intact, originate with, in terms of Tibetan Buddhism, the efforts of Marpa the translator. Without his efforts, those transmissions would not have been available today.
And
as we saw, the second most important person here in terms of these teachings still being available or these transmissions still being available is the efforts of Jamgön Lodrö Thaye, who prevented these transmissions from becoming extinct. So this is, or what has been said till now, is a bit about the author of the Treasury of Knowledge, what sort of person and master he was. So that's all for today.